Welcome to another cutted out edition of the Life Seminars podcast with Allison Rees. Today we'll be discussing listening and advice giving.
Listening to somebody complain or express a negative feeling is not an invitation to fix them or give them advice. Most of the time, people just want to be heard, period. So if you find yourself telling people what they should do and fixing their problems, you might want to cut that out. I mean, you don't know what the other person really needs, and just because it worked for you doesn't mean it will work for them. As a matter of fact, it's almost insulting to assume that you have come up with something that somebody else can't think of. This is especially true for your children. You know, it's hard not to offer advice when the answers come so easily to us with all of our life experience. But that's not really accommodating a child's learning process. If anything, it might make them feel inadequate or even resent you for giving them answers that, they can think of themselves. In the teen years, children want to appear somewhat knowledgeable of the world because in a short time, they will have to come up with their own answers. Hearing your advice is a sure way to shut them down as it takes over their responsibility and their confidence. So I've got some pointers for you. Here are some listening don'ts. It's important to recognize how you might be shutting down somebody's feelings and communication. So let's just start with what not to do. Number 1, obviously ignoring somebody, distracting with humor or diverting away from what the person is saying is a listening don't. Number 2, don't start to minimize the person's problem or downplay what it is they're saying. Try not to analyze them or interpret why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. Nobody wants to be analyzed, and it just is not listening. Number 3, don't start moralizing and preaching about life and the way the world is out there when someone talks about something that's bothering them, especially if it's your child, saying things like, well, life's like that. The world is full of people who don't care about others. These things happen to everybody. These kinds of responses aren't helpful, and while some of it might be true, it is just not listening. It's shutting the speaker down. Number 4, sometimes people talk about, their friends or complain about what somebody else is doing at work. Your kids might come home and talk about how unfair their teacher is or how somebody was mean to them in the playground. And it isn't a good idea when the child is expressing his feelings to start pointing out the other person's point of view. For example, well, maybe the teacher was too busy to listen to you, or maybe Johnny on the playground was just having a bad day. That immediately shuts down the feelings of the child who's trying to express them. Number 5, it's okay to ask questions to get clarity about what somebody is saying. So sometimes when people speak, we find ourselves getting lost. So when that happens, it's really great to say, oops, I've lost you. Did you mean this or that? But when it comes to listening to someone, when they're in the middle of expressing a strong emotion, you really need to keep those probing questions out of the picture because they're in the middle of feeling something, and to have to start answering questions that you might have to satisfy your need takes them out of that feeling state and has them now trying to think about what it is that they're saying. That will definitely shut them down. So watch your questions, especially with kids, because too many questions can feel like an interrogation. Advice giving, solving problems for people, whether it's your child, your friend, your partner, or somebody at work, remember the part about listening is to actually let people express themselves. When we express ourselves, it's actually a way of discharging negative emotion. And often if someone can express strong feelings and talk about what's happening for them, they get enough calmness to be able to see things differently. And once that happens, they can start to come up with ideas and strategies to get their needs met. So feelings point to frustrated needs. Negative feelings point to frustrated needs. And when we can be aware of our feelings and articulate the need, then we can come up with ideas that work for us. How often have you had somebody, instead of just listening, give you a bunch of advice or try to fix your problem? It just doesn't land well. Sometimes when we have actually finished listening to somebody, a person might ask us what we think or if we have some ideas, and that can be okay. The point is, communication has 3 major components: listening, speaking, and taking turns. And if we're giving advice or minimizing feelings or doing all of these things, we are simply not listening. So we have to give the speaker time to express themselves and be very tentative, even if we do give advice when it's asked for. Number 7, which is similar to advice giving, but it's completely taking over the problem. So sometimes if your child has a predicament at school, it's easy to jump in and take over. But that can stop your child from talking to you because they might be afraid of what it is that you're going to do. And sometimes it can actually make things worse. So be careful when you take over the problem. You're really crossing a responsibility boundary when you do that, either with your child or with an adult. Number 8, ordering, directing, and correcting. One of the frustrating things about raising children is that they have problems with their feelings. When they're young toddlers and preschoolers, they can't articulate how they feel, so they pinch and they hit and they scratch and they bite. When they become around 4 or 5, they may start to get out of physical expressions of frustration and anger, but then they might say things like, "I hate you." When they're teenagers, they might swear, they might say they hate their life, they hate this house, they hate this family. And it's important as parents that we don't react to these kinds of expressions. This is immaturity. This is how children express feelings. When we can identify the feelings that they're expressing and interpret those feelings, then what we do is we teach the child a feeling vocabulary. So ordering and directing and correcting is not a good idea. Stop talking like that. You shouldn't say things like, "I hate you." When you do that, remember, you're simply not listening. Number 9, blaming. Sometimes when somebody expresses a negative emotion, the person listening starts to blame them for what it is that they did or how they're feeling. Just think about the experience of having one of your kids come to you and complain about an argument that they just had with their sibling. And they might be talking to you and tell you what they did, and you might start to judge them while they're expressing themselves. Saying things like, "Well, you shouldn't have been in your sister's room to begin with," or "You should have known better to start bugging her when she had a friend over." Those kinds of things immediately shut down your child and the expression of feelings. It is going to discourage your child from talking to you. And really, at the end of the day, you want your child to trust you enough to be able to express all kinds of things. Just because you're accepting their perceptions and their feelings does not mean you're agreeing with them. Imagine if your child comes to you and says, "I hate having a brother. I think we should get rid of him." If you agreed with him, it would sound like, "He's driving me crazy too. You pack his bags and I'll send him to Nana's." We can accept feelings without agreeing. We can say something like, "Boy, you're so mad you wish you didn't have a brother right now." And that's not agreeing. Finally, number 10, sympathy. When somebody takes on your feelings and they start to feel sorry for you and start to express deep concern for what it is that you're going through, quite often this is called sympathy. And sympathy can make you feel simply pathetic. With sympathy, it's as if the person is now taking on your feelings and now they've taken over the emotions and the problem themselves. So remember that sympathy is not empowering. So becoming familiar with the listening don'ts helps you catch yourself when you're shutting the speaker down. Once you've gotten familiar with your own listening style and some of the negative tendencies that you might have, you can start to create some space for listening effectively. And listening is actually quite simple. It means not doing all of those things that I just talked about. But really, when you listen to somebody, you've got two goals. Number one, it's to try to imagine what that person is actually feeling. And it's not being sympathetic, it's having empathy. It's putting yourself in their shoes. And again, just really trying to figure out what is it that this person is feeling right now. And number two, why are they feeling this way? So trying to put your finger on the feelings by labeling the feelings is very effective. It's a wonderful way to teach children about their feelings. And when you start to say things like, it sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed, or it sounds like this was very disappointing for you, it gives people a chance to get some clarity. And if you're wrong, don't worry about it. Even young children can correct you and give you a different feeling word when they're feeling calm. And then you want to find out exactly what they said to you, but don't repeat it like a parrot. You want to put the content of what they're saying into your own words. So you were walking home and you ran into Bobby and he pushed you down and he ruined your art project. You're really upset and really mad too. That's being able to put the content out there with the feeling. The listening do's. Pay attention to the person who's speaking. Give them eye contact and let your body language show that you're actually interested and you're really listening to them. Try to focus on understanding the content of what's being said. Get really clear with what it is that they're telling you. And this is where you can put it in your own words when you feed it back. Pay attention to the body language of the person who's expressing their feelings. 90% of communication is tone and body language. A very small percentage of it is actually the words, particularly with children. They're not really able, when they're in the middle of strong feelings, to tell you what it is that's going on for them. So sometimes you're listening to very strong body language or very strong words and having to interpret those words for them. It's important to be able to feed back, and this is the thing with listening, is that you want to be able to feed back how the person is feeling and why they're feeling that way. And you got to keep it brief, because when you're listening and you're feeding things back like this, you still want to stay in their shoes. You don't want to take over with some long interpretation. Remember not to fall into those listening don'ts. And sometimes it's really fitting, after someone has expressed their feelings, to help them articulate not only how they feel. Every feeling word can be very different, but to articulate what it is that their feeling is pointing to. What is it that they actually need? And when you can do that, you can support them in coming up with an effective strategy to get their needs met.
What is an effective strategy for when my child is having a tantrum?
Well, kids have tantrums. I mean, the average 3-year-old can have up to 6 tantrums a day when they're going through a stressful time. Sometimes a tantrum is caused by fatigue or hunger. So, when they're in the middle of strong emotions, it might not be a 3-year-old, it might be an older child. And they're in what I call the vortex, where they're just acting out all that negative emotion. There really isn't a lot you can do. What I find is when parents learn to listen to their kids, at times when the feelings aren't so big. For example, when a child comes home and complains about something that happened through the day, if a parent's actually able to listen to that, it releases a lot of that negative charge, so it's less likely for kids to have those big tantrums. Again, for younger children, they just basically have to burn that strong feeling out. So your reflective listening isn't necessarily going to be effective when they're screaming and kicking and,
right.
So we have to be realistic about the role of listening. But, I mean, let's face it. As parents, we've got to figure out what the triggers are to our kids' behavior. They're not good at doing that. And if we've got an ability to communicate with them and they trust us and they know that they can talk to us about things, we are going to see less big behavior.
Okay, right. How does listening fit in with limits?
Oh, okay. Well, I always say that limit setting and empathy go hand in hand. So my daughter might be upset because she wanted to go to her friend's place, and I might be setting a limit, explaining that today she can't go to a friend's place, and maybe she's upset about that. I can reflect her feelings. I can simply say, I can see that you're really disappointed. You were looking forward to going to Krista's house, and I'm letting you know that that's not going to happen today. So when you actually give some empathy while you're also setting the limits, it actually helps your child to calm down, because it's really important for them to know that you get how they're feeling.
Right.
This is particularly true for kids who are very, very persistent. They can get locked into negative feelings for a long time. And what can help to unlock that is, again, that sincere kind of empathy and pinpointing how it is that they're feeling.
Okay. What if I can't listen?
There are so many times that we cannot listen to somebody. I mean, we call it active listening because it takes a great deal of energy to hear somebody, especially kids. I mean, kids can talk and talk and talk, and you can't possibly listen to all that. Sometimes we're busy. Sometimes we're upset ourselves. Sometimes the person talking just talks too much. I think the important thing is, if you cannot listen, that you've got to be able to let that person know. I think one of the bigger listening don'ts with parents is pretend listening. Just pretending to listen. Kids pick up on that really, really quickly, and they stop trusting you.
Right.
This is when, as a counselor, I would hear things like, well, my parents never listened to me, and, parents are often shocked by that statement, and sometimes it's just simply not true, but I think it's because of this pretend listening. So be really honest. Right now I'm driving, or right now I'm busy and I'm not able to listen, but I am going to listen to you in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour. Young kids, of course, may not be able to wait. And if it's a very strong feeling, obviously this isn't going to work. We have to be present and put things down.
Right.
So I think it's important not to expect to have to listen to everything. And I'm just going to say one more thing about this. Sometimes we overdo the listening, thinking that we have to be so present for everything that this person is saying. And that's when I think it can get intrusive, Like, I can be hanging out with a friend or talking to someone, and I don't need them hanging on to every word, repeating back my feelings and the content of what I'm saying. I really only need that at certain times, and it's usually if I've got, a strong feeling coming on, or maybe not even strong, but a confused feeling or something like that, and, when I just want to make sense of something.
Right.
Communication can be really, really messy, and I hate it when people turn it into some sort of, intellectual exercise. I think at the end of the day, just cueing into the person we're with and being present for them is huge. And if we can figure out the listening don'ts and the listening do's, fantastic.
This has been another Cut It Out edition of the Life Seminars podcast with Allison Rees. Thank you for listening.